we're at this inflection point where the days of building huge internal teams and kind of just throwing headcount at a problem are kind of over. And I really feel the future ideal talent acquisition state or the way the team is shaped or looks is it's smaller, it's more strategic, and it's more plugged into the business, so that you end up with a future TA team that's smaller in nature, supported by external plugins. Make the CFO your best friend, if that's possible. And be very, very clear. I have a team this size. This is our output. This is what we can deliver for you. Start with cost per hire. And it's so simple.
Yeah.
But actually understand all of the metrics that go into creating a cost per hire. And then from there, try and carve and shave 20%. Figure out where 20, and finance love you then, because it's like, well, I'm going to show you where I can save 20% on this. So all of the basic administrative work that recruiters do, I think, will be gone in the next year. Scheduling, CV sifting, sourcing, rejections, back and forth with diaries, all of these things I think will go out the window.
Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Leaders in Talent podcast, where we explore what's next in recruitment with the actual talent leaders shaping the future of the industry. And today I'm joined by someone whose name often comes up when I speak to other top TA leaders, Rory Mullins. Rory led recruitment at companies like Uber, Trainline, Wise, and TransferGo. And Rory is known for building and rebuilding TA functions from the ground up. In this episode, however, we're not going to be talking about how to build recruitment teams from the ground up, because we're going to be looking forward. What does the future of recruitment teams look like? And is it different than how we've always been running and building recruitment teams? We're going to be talking about the shift from large in-house teams to blended models, combining internal, embedded, and agency resources. Of course, we'll touch upon AI and how AI could transfer sourcing and recruitment, why fractional recruitment leadership is on the rise, and what it takes to run a more modern, scalable, and strategic TA function. Rory, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Adriaan. I'm going to steal that intro as well. It was perfect.
So good, right? It's all you. You make
way
my life easy. You make my life easy. Rory, let's get right into this. Why is this topic so relevant for you?
I think it's relevant for me because I feel like I've lived it over the last 10, 15 years. And whether that was kind of building teams inside hyper-growth startups, or working at scale in kind of much more larger global orgs, I kind of just feel like the model is ripe for change.
Yep.
Right. And I think we're at this inflection point where the days of building huge internal teams and kind of just throwing headcount at a problem are kind of over, right? Yeah. And we're at this place now where we kind of need leaner, smarter, more adaptable ways of working. And I think that means rethinking the mix that we now have in TA when we think about internal versus embedded agencies versus recruitment agencies. And I'll say recruitment under the auspices of retained recruitment.
Are you facing market volatility, need to hire quickly, or have a team that sits idle? Meet Matcher, your flexible recruitment and sourcing partner. Scale your recruitment capacity up or down without compromising on quality. Trusted by Booking.com, Miro, Heineken, Grammarly, and Deal, Matcher is the RPO disruptor making waves in Europe and the US. For scale-ups and corporates, Matcher covers engineering, go-to-market, and G&A roles. Visit Matcher.io to see how we can support you. That's MATCHR.io.
I think contingency recruitment is dead, and we'll talk about that as well. Yeah. But actually, it's also personal for me, because I think I'm at this point now in my own career where I'm thinking about building a business around these ideas and how I think I can influence the industry a little bit. So, yeah, I think it's super relevant because I've been there and done it, and I think it's super relevant because it's kind of what I think about on a daily basis, as sad as that may be.
I don't know if it's sad. I love the recruitment industry. I love that we have such a profound impact of helping people find a meaningful job in something as important as someone's career. And that in the end, no matter how much AI we throw at problems, we're still a people-centric industry, right? So, and that's why I love to talk to people like yourself that have been in this industry for so long and have seen so much. When we started. Without the recording start this conversation, we talked a tiny bit about the boom and bust cycle, right? Especially in the last couple of years. I've seen it with our clients. We've experienced it in our service. Crazy demand, no demand. Crazy demand, no demand, right? Tell me a little bit more in terms of, because I feel you've seen it all. You've definitely had have a couple of war scars, and using that maybe as, what do you see for the future that a resilient, scalable TA team should look like?
Yeah, I've definitely seen it. I mean, I've been part of teams that are, in the multiples of hundreds. I've been in the 100 team. I've led teams of 30 odd recruiters in my own time. And I really feel like the future ideal talent acquisition state, or the way the team is shaped or looks, is it's smaller, it's more strategic, and it's more plugged into the business, so that you end up with a future TA team that's smaller in nature, supported by external plugins, right? Whatever those plugins are, and we can talk about those. And that team isn't just about filling roles anymore. Your internal TA team is focused on, yes, hiring, but it's also hired, workforce planning, market mapping, storytelling, and the storytelling of the pitch of the company and the growth story. And they're building systems, and they're building infrastructure around hiring. And that core team can be focused on strategy, employer brand, and then you complement that by flexible layers, right? So you think about embedded partners that we can scale up and scale down for when we have scaling moments. And then you kind of start to build out this, I'm going to say the agency, but it's trusted agency partners, who I think they're much more for niche hiring, right? So we're not going, I think, anymore. And you can see this because there's been a downturn in revenue at the big players. And there's a shift towards smaller niche agencies who provide specialist services in specialist functions. And I think having those relationships and building those relationships is super important. So your internal TA team, I think, is now going to be less about volume, because the volume will come from the external support. And it's going to become much more about orchestration around a talent infrastructure.
So then, how do you define what that right mix is? And like, what would your advice be to, if you speak to other TA leaders that are grappling with, uncertainty, volatility in the market, hiring internally versus externally, agencies, but then also, budgets, right? With budgets that are shrinking and getting smaller and smaller. Like, how do you tie all of those together?
I think for me, you've got to start with output, right? And I think so. This is kind of counter to what I've just said around, hiring being the only thing, but it's starting with output. So where do we need to get to as a business by the end of the year? And what percentage of that can I deliver with the existing internal TA team or a smaller TA team? And then I align that and I say, okay, well, look, we'll put a number on it. We'll say we'll take 60% of hiring, we'll put it with the internal TA team, and we'll save 40% for external partners. Okay. Or it's 100% in the internal TA team, because actually we're not doing a hell of a lot of hiring, but we know that if we turn the volume up, that additional hiring is going to become from external partners, and we'll allocate budgets to that. Then I would look at, what are the company-wide OKRs? So what is the business focus for the next 12 months, the next quarter, the next half? And then I would start to shape what my team are delivering from an OKR point of view that lend themselves into the wider company OKR. So we're focusing really purely on the business direction and supporting from that perspective. So all of that project work starts to come from there. I think prior to that, I probably would have taken a step back, and I'm a massive believer in building strong relationships with the finance team. make the CFO your best friend if that's possible. And be very, very clear. I have a team this size. This is our output. This is what we can deliver for you. Our systems cost X. My salaries are Y. Z is theoretical in the sense that actually at some point I'm going to bring in some extra support if I need to, but this is what it's going to cost. So you start to capacity model around multiple scenarios. So you start to be very clever around, well, okay, if you want 100 hires, this is how we do it. If you want 200 hires, this is how we'll do it. And this is what it's going to cost. And if you want 300, this is what it's going to cost. And this is how we're going to structure it. So you've got to start getting quite smart around scenario planning and really, really being clear on what you need to build. And I think that scenario planning allows you to have a clear enough sense of your internal team and what it looks like and how it's shaped. Because ultimately they should be able to deliver all of your attritional hiring. So all of those backfills that come in, plus a certain percentage of growth.
Yep.
And that probably gives you a number. So let's say we go for 10% growth plus backfill or attrition hiring. Do I cover that with my internal team? And then what are the models I need to use to deliver everything else if we start to turn the volume up on growth?
Tell me a little bit more, because I would love, and maybe you have some anecdotes or some experiences on your dynamic with finance and, as head of recruitment, as a senior leader in recruitment, and on how that dynamic has helped you be successful, and or some of the learnings, why you said it's one of the most important stakeholders in the organization.
I think a great example, I won't say where because it's slightly there, but I inherited a TA team, and there was a very clear example where we were going to overspend by about 600 grand in the year. So I built out a projection model for the rest of the year. And I said, look, we're going to massively overspend here. So whoever had done the previous budget hadn't factored in a number of elements. So I was very open and honest, and I said, this is where we have an issue, right? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to solve it by renegotiating our ATS, renegotiating our partnership with LinkedIn. We ended up signing up much longer contracts, but I showed the saving that we were bringing in. So it was almost like I'm showing you willing, I'm showing you we have a problem. I'm not hiding behind it. And I'm getting to you before you come to me. I'm going to deliver savings, and this is how we're going to do it. And actually, in this example, it was the core internal team was right-sized. I had a couple of vacancies that I killed that we didn't hire. So we didn't bring in additional heads. There was an existing embedded partnership in place. But what we were able to do was, once we started to ramp up capacity with the internal team, I started to very slowly reduce the number of embedded partners we had month on month until they were gone, and they were off-site 2 months early. So by renegotiating some contract terms with suppliers, rethinking how we built the embedded model that we had in place, I didn't upset the provider, because I was really clear with them. You do this, and I think this is how you're going to do it. And they were like, yep, absolutely. And it was within the terms of their contract. They were a little bit disappointed they were going to lose 2 months of revenue, but that's fine. But we kept the existing relationship, and we were able to bring them back in when we needed to. So I think a lot of it is about, and I think this is the trick to finance people in general, know your numbers. And if you know your numbers, you have this great opportunity to have open conversations. And then that led to, actually, I want to spend some money on this over here, but what it's going to give us is X, Y, and Z. And then you're able to kind of increase what you spend, because you can show a return on investment over a 3-month period or a 3-year period. Sorry. So yeah, I think that's probably a good
Great. Love that anecdote. Hey, and Rory, is this something, do you have a background in finance? Is this something that you learned over time, or is this something that you've put a lot of time and effort and focus on?
I put time and effort. Yes, I don't have a background in finance at all. I'm a words guy. I'm not really a numbers guy. I do like data, and I think I get a little bit obsessive about it. But it actually comes back to first time leading a team at Uber. I reported to somebody who was obsessed with capacity modeling. And they gave me an absolute grilling on my numbers in terms of the right sizing of my team. And I spent, I would say, 5 nights back and forth. This isn't right. This isn't right. Redo it. And eventually I got it right. And then I suddenly realized, okay, this person's quite senior. the way to this person's heart and the way to build a relationship with them is to know my numbers.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of built an obsession over this. And I felt, well, if I'm going to tell any story internally within a business, the narrative is going to be fed by data. That
Yeah.
I'm not going to use the data just for data's sake. We're going to tell a story with the numbers. And that I think helps. And I think the second reason is I spent 10 years in agency. And in agency recruitment, you live and die by your metrics, KPIs.
Yeah.
I was talking to one of my old CEOs the other night, and he said, my lads say KPIs. It's not a bad word. It is. It's okay to have KPIs.
Yeah.
It's understanding, your input equals output. That's what recruitment is. So many other things you can add to it, but its purest form recruitment is whatever I put in, I will get a number out the other side.
Yeah.
And in those days, it used to be, if I send 5 CVs to a role, I'll get 3 interviews and I'll get 1 hire. Like you kind of work those metrics.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably informed a lot of my decision making over the years as well.
Well, I want to take one step back because I find this fascinating, right? Is one of the things that keeps coming back when I speak to senior leaders in talent is especially in recruitment, we don't have a seat at the table.
Yeah.
It's a CHRO that represents recruitment, but it often becomes like, okay, we've decided this recruitment, we need to hire 300 people. Go, just tell me when it's realistic, when it's gonna be happening, right? With your capacity planning, one of the things that I often see is that senior recruitment leaders fail to speak the language of business, which is finance, and me asking you about this, right? And really understanding from a overall company perspective how the company makes money and how the people function drives top line revenue, profit, and is also able to free up working capital, right? And therefore increase company value. When you were drilled on capacity planning with Uber, like what were some of the drivers and levers that you were constantly challenged on in terms of doing that right? Because I've seen that this is one of the hardest things in a recruitment function to get right.
Yeah. Well, I think the first challenge in that scenario was actually I wasn't being ambitious enough. So they wanted me to have a bigger team than I wanted, which is a great scenario to be in because normally it's I want a huge team.
Yeah.
The reverse. It was challenging me to be a little bit more, well, because in a way I kind of I came at it quite blindly, and I think the learn in that scenario was you've got to start with the end point and then work backwards. Well, I think I was thinking, well, I'll add 3 or 4 heads, and 3 or 4 heads will mean this. Well, there was no thought gone into actually, well, there's a ramp period. And I, naively as a new manager, didn't think, well, actually, there's a ramp period. They're not going to do anything for 2 months. They're only going to make their first hire. And so you start to change the numbers and you think, okay, they're going to cost me X before they produce.
Yep.
And then it really started to center in on, well, what's the impact of this team on product growth? Because in this case, we were hiring product data design and engineering, right? So we're building product. The product isn't going to be delivered if you don't hire these teams. So it's making that correlation and that connection, I think, was super important. And it was pretty simplistic in its nature. But as over time, that's evolved into whether it was workforce planning at a company like Wise, where we didn't have people partners at the time. They do now, but when I was there, we didn't. So I sat with FP&A and we plotted out, when are we going to put bums on seats? So when is this engineer going to land in Tallinn? And when is this engineer going to land in Budapest? And we genuinely worked through it, and we got a sense of what the delivery number would need to be. So then my team became much more clearer around, you need to be ramped at hiring by this date because this person needs to land, and here's the time to hire, the time to fill, and the time to start. And we start to work on those metrics. So you bring some TA metrics into your workforce planning, and then you get a better sense of that. And I think the finance piece and speaking the language start with cost per hire. And it's so simple.
Yeah.
But actually understand all of the metrics that go into creating a cost per hire. And then from there, try and carve and shave 20%. Figure out where 20, and finance love you then, because it's like, well, I'm going to show you where I can save 20% on this. right? You probably already know going into the conversation where it's coming from, but make it a thing. I think that's super, super important. And I think it really helps. But then the other factor, I think this is something that we forget about. And this is helpful actually when you start to then have this wider appreciation of performance, right? And this is where talent becomes more than talent acquisition, is what's the stickability of those hires? Okay, yeah, it costs €7,000 a head to hire. Great, fantastic. It's going to cost me a couple of million a year to make these hires. Fine. But if we're not retaining 95% of those new hires, I'm actually costing you way more, right? So it's like, what is that drainage on the other side of that acquisition funnel? And then getting a sense of actually what was the retention of new hires in the previous 12 months and where can you make improvements? So then you start to say, well, not only am I having an impact at the front end, we're adding more people in, so therefore we're moving quicker, we're selling more product, we're building more product, we're better for finance, but whatever it is, but we're also not losing money at the back end because we're losing this talent, or we're retaining this talent certainly for the first 12 months. And after 12 months, it's not my responsibility, right? It's that the business has done something wrong. But, I like to see my teams be really focused on actually a 12-month stickability. So we get a real sense of what the performance is like.
Love this. Love this. Rory, coming back to the TA teams, right?
Yeah.
You've come into different teams, different types of sizes, some well running, some things you really had to build things from the ground up again. Tell me, what do your first 90 days look like? What are the first things that you do that you look at in order to see, hey, what's the problem or what's the opportunity here at hand? And two, can you maybe give me some anecdotes on what are some of the actions that you take in those first 90 days?
Yeah. First 90 days, there's a couple of things I do at every company.
Yeah.
The first is listen. Well, I talk and then I listen, but essentially, I over-index on meetings. So I'm inheriting a team, or I'm creating a team that is going to support all of the functional leaders in the business.
Yeah.
So the first people I need to meet, aside from the team, of course, are the functional leaders I'm going to support.
Yeah.
Right. So how has the team performed previously? What's gone well? What's gone badly? What would you like to see more of? What are your hiring plans over the next 12 months? Very simple questions.
Yeah.
Open-ended. Give them room to speak. You pick up tons because you're new, right? So people kind of, even though you're only your TA leader, you're talking to a chief product officer or CTO, they still kind of want to impress you. They still want to show you that you've joined a really good business, right? Yeah. They'll tell you all the good stuff, but then over time, as the conversation draws on, they will then start to tell you some of the bad stuff or some of the things that haven't gone so well. And for me, it's bringing all that together. Because the brief, if you think about it, for me, primarily is fix hiring. Yeah. You've hired an new TA leader because somebody's resigned or they've been let go or whatever, but it is ultimately to fix hiring, right? But you kind of don't know what the root cause is. So is it process? Is it kind of bad leadership alignment? Is it unclear EVP? So it's almost like I go on a listening tour. Founders, C-suite, hiring managers, talk to the team, talk to people who are leaving. I've had this in a few either somebody is about to exit, right? Because jumping in an exit interview, right?
Yeah.
Or in my previous gig, recruiters had joined in that interim period before I joined. So I went and I let those guys.
Sorry.
Bless you. Yeah. Say fever season, right? It's like
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spoke to those recruiters because they left the business. I'm like, well, why did you leave? I was joining. So what's the issue? And then figure out where those problems are. And then I genuinely sit down and I compile all of that and I present it back to the team. And I'm like, this is your scorecard, right? This is what you do well. This is what you do badly. This is what you fix. Yep. So the team get from me, within 3 or 4 weeks, they get a really clear sense of what we're going to build over the next 3 to 6 months. And I'll give them a chance to defend it because, sometimes a lot of the feedback you get is anecdotal and it's not actually true. And you've got to try and unpick it and figure it out. So you kind of go through it piecemeal, present it to people, give the team or the existing TA team space to talk and answer what the business has said about them. And then I get really clear on my expectations. I'm not a harsh leader. I'm not a difficult leader. But there's a moment in time when I join a company where I get very clear on this is what we are going to do and this is how we are going to work. And I've said this before in other conversations. I have a no dickheads policy, which I'm really clear on.
It's a good policy. I like that policy.
I like it's it's a thing. It's an all blacks face in rugby. No dickheads in the dressing room kind of thing. But essentially, that is my general ethos about how I expect teams to work, and I'm really clear about it. And I spell that out on day one, or on day one, probably week 3.
Yeah.
And I've had people resign because of it, right? Which is really good because you kind of know then immediately, okay, they weren't right for me. They weren't right for the team, right? This is what we need to get to, because you have to then create. And I think by presenting everybody with your positive bits and your failings, you immediately create a sense of culture and a sense of team.
Yeah.
And then it's like, right, as a team, we're going to go and fix this. So I've taken the company voice, I've taken your voice. Now together, let's go and build this and fix it. And I think that if I get that done in the first 90 days, and I generally want to make at least 2 to 3 hires myself in the first 90 days, because I can still do it. I'm showing you I can still do it.
Yeah.
But B,
so you mean not for your own team, but just
I'll go out and hire an engineer, hire a product person.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Because you have to know, the only way to know truly the process and how it works
is actually do it. Wow, that's great. That's great. I love that.
You map the process from start to finish, which is brilliant, right? Because then okay, this is how finance respond, this is how interviewers respond, this is how here's our scorecards, and you kind of work through all of those things. And I think no matter how big the team you inherit, go and do the day job as a recruiter for a period of time. I think it's super important and super relevant. And if you can, which I think is always really important, I'd say this to any leader, not just a TA, go and work with a CS team for a day and understand what our customers say when they're complaining and when they're angry and when they're annoyed, because you really need to get a sense of how the business operates. And that's the one place, sitting in customer service for a day will tell you more about where your business is at than any other meeting you go to, because you get a real sense of what people think about you externally.
Do you have an example of a company where you did this?
Yeah, I've done it twice. Sat with the CS team and actually answered call center calls, which is quite fun. Well, not fun actually when people are saying, "Where's my money?" Being held for legitimate reasons, right? But they don't necessarily.
Yeah.
And then Uber also, we were very big on either working as a delivery driver or delivery bikes, or working in the office where the drivers were coming in to talk about issues with their car or their licenses or various different things as well. So it's really helpful. It gives you a really good appreciation of where you are as a business.
Oh, so good. I love it. Talking about Wise and Uber, right? You've worked in those organizations as a senior talent leaders, big teams.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think big teams are something of the past?
Why do I think that something of the past? I think because people are frustrated by boom and bust, first of all.
Yeah.
Right? So I know firsthand a number of recruiters have left the industry. Yeah, because they've been laid off, or they've mainly because they've been laid off, right? And then they've struggled to get another job because teams aren't hiring at the same level, right? Or they go through that big company layoff, 3 months off, big company layoff, and you see it continuously. And I think so there's an element of attrition just bleeding into, I think, the TA space. I think there's just frustration.
Yeah.
Marketing and TA are always the first 2 teams to be looked at, right? When making cuts. And I think people are just annoyed. They're pissed off with it. So I think that's number one, right? I think that's the first thing. I think secondly, because of this, TA leaders are probably far more conscious about not building big teams. I'm always a little bit dubious when someone says, I'm going to hire 50 recruiters. I'm like, why?
Yeah.
What problem are you solving? Because you're gonna, the biggest headache you're giving yourself is you're letting 25 of them go in 18 months time.
Yeah.
Right. And that's not great. Right. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is we now have, I feel, a really good blend in the market of tools and plugins, as I mentioned earlier, that can support and then augment existing internal TA teams. So there's that sense of bringing in these specialist agencies, bringing embedded partners in who can really, really know your business and spend time with you.
Right.
And then it's buying the right AI tools that can then help complement your existing team. I kind of like, I've been playing with a few of the tools. I kind of obsessively play with some of these tools, but like I liken it now to when I worked in agency, you know, if you were a good recruiter, you got a sourcer.
Yeah.
Right. And then maybe you got two sourcers. And now I kind of see, well, actually, okay, if you're a really good internal recruiter, let me give you a couple of agentic AI sourcing tools, and then you can be supported by those. And I think so. I just think that that's where we're getting to now, where there's a coexisting model that allows you to have an internal core TA team that's focused on hiring, yes, but also focused on hiring improvements. And one of the challenges I think you have when you build big TA teams and you build big companies, within 6 to 12 months, a recruiter will come to you and say, I want to do more projects. Right. Okay. So if I have more tools and more things externally, there's more space for internal recruiters to work on more projects. So I just think we're at this inflection point now where teams just don't need to be as bloated as they were previously. And I think they can be far more effective with the purchasing of the right tools. And we're only at the start of this. Like genuinely, I think what we have today will probably, I wouldn't say laugh at, but I think we'll kind of look back fondly as kind of almost innocent in terms of where I think TA tools are going to go in the next 18 months to 2 years.
Talking about a little bit in terms of AI and process and tooling and workflows, etc. What's, any thoughts there on the role of the recruiter, the impact of some of the tooling that you've already seen, and where you think the industry is heading?
The role of the recruiter, I think the individual recruiter can become more effective. I think they can deliver more. So they can spend less time sourcing, more time talking to candidates. They're probably going to spend less time filtering through irrelevant CVs because we're going to filter a lot of those out at the outset. So they're having more impactful conversations. I think the individual recruiter over time is going to become more involved in employer branding, is going to become more involved in workforce planning, is going to become more involved in succession planning conversations. So in fact, in many ways, we're going to see smaller teams with elevated recruiters who are going to have much more responsibility in a wider talent ecosystem.
Yeah.
And we're going to be able to deliver that because we're going to buy the right tools or provide the right services that are going to give them space to do that. So all of the basic administrative work that recruiters do, I think, will be done in the next year. Scheduling, CV sifting, sourcing, rejections, back and forth with diaries, all of these things I think will go out the window. Many of them are already. And I think even to a point, actually, when you think about volume hiring, I think a lot of the early stage yes, no answer stuff will be gone as well, because we can give that to an AI because it's simple for them to do, and they can do it on WhatsApp, or they can do it on email, they can do it in chat, whatever. That's going to be very easy. A little bit put off by the concept of being interviewed by a digital recruiter on a video. Not quite there yet, but I think some of the text-based stuff I think is really easy, and we're already there anyway. But I do think that that's where you're going to see the evolution of the recruiter, or I suppose the talent partner, let's call them, right? Because they're probably more than a recruiter now in that sense. So smaller teams, but I think more elevated roles and closer to that seat at the table, actually. Because I think I think recruiters have a real opportunity to lead from the front, but I think TA leaders need to make these decisions themselves. I think the mistake will come if they let the business decide that for them. By the way, I've bought you this tech. By the way, you can reduce your team by 40%. That's where the frustration will come. I think TA leaders need to lead from the front and be really open on this.
Yeah.
That's why I need a smaller team. But with a smaller team, I'm going to have this, and this.
Amazing. Amazing. Rory, you also played the role of interim CPO.
Yes.
What did that experience teach you about the intersection of talent and the broader people leadership side of things?
Oh, it was very short-lived. It was only 3 months, 4 months.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's fascinating. Yeah.
I think what it taught me is that I knew this kind of going in, but I saw it firsthand. It's just all interconnected.
Yeah.
Right. And in many ways, talent acquisition is the starting point of the people function. And I think there is a delineation in lots of companies. Talent's over here and people is over here, and they don't necessarily talk to each other. And in some companies they do, but in others they don't. And I kind of feel like you get to that point, like you can't fix hiring if your onboarding is broken, right? You can't build a pipeline if your EVP is shit or fuzzy, right? Or your values don't show up in performance reviews because then that stickability piece doesn't carry through, right? So you kind of start to see where talent bleeds into culture, bleeds into L&D, bleeds into leadership. That you start to, I think it gave me a much better appreciation of actually how important recruitment is in the process and how important talent acquisition is. And it gave me a very clear sense of actually how talent acquisition and people partnering in particular need to build really strong relationships. Plus I got to learn a ton about the people upside, which I never really considered. So it's nice to get a sense of that. But it's also, I just think it gave me a better appreciation of the people world. And it probably over time will make me a more holistic, more strategic TA leader. And it might also have taught me not to become a chief people officer. I'm not sure about that. Maybe.
Did you want to become a CPO or maybe?
Maybe I don't. Yeah. I think it taught me that TA is my world. I love being in this space. But it was very nice to get an appreciation of it. I also had to have some very difficult conversations in a very short period of time as well. So I got a much better appreciation of actually how tough the role is. And in many ways, it reminded me actually that even though the people team has a seat at the table through the CHRO or the chief people officer, you've still got to shout really loud to get your voice heard, because your agenda is not the first agenda, and you've got to work really hard to get it there. Because you're still seen as a cost, you're still seen as a centralized function, building a product, right? And I think these things are difficult in certainly scalable land, right? So I got an appreciation of actually how hard the job is.
So good. What a valuable experience, right? Even though it was only 3 months. Yeah.
It's great. Yeah, I really loved it.
Yeah.
Well, the biggest challenge was actually having to manage my peers.
Yeah.
And then do their performance reviews. That was just weird.
Yeah.
But, it was good nonetheless.
Yeah. I remember the first time becoming a manager, and I had to do the same. I felt so awkward. And then I remember this very well. My second boss, I asked him, I really looked up to him. He was a really young guy and always had time for me and was able to articulate things in a very clear and precise way. And I remember I called him because I'd recently been promoted and I had 2 direct reports. And I asked him, do you have any advice as a manager? I asked him. And he said, never be afraid to be the boss.
I like that.
And to this day, it stuck with me. He said, because even though these are your peers, maybe even your seniors, by definition, by your job title and how the hierarchy is structured, you are the boss, and that's absolutely fine. But if you don't own that title, things are not going to get nowhere.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to be the boss. Don't be afraid to tell how things should be and how you think you should lead. And it stuck with me. Don't be afraid to be the boss.
I like that. I'm going to take that.
Yeah.
I'm going to steal that. Along with your intro, that's going to be my other takeaway.
You're great. Let's do that. So that's a beautiful circle. Rory, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Find me on LinkedIn.
Find me on LinkedIn?
I've become a prolific poster.
I love it. And that's how we got connected, right? We were connected, but I saw your post. I was like, I got to get Rory on the podcast. And I also heard great stories about other TA folks. And here we are. You 100% delivered on that promise. I really enjoyed the conversation, Rory. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome.
Cheers.